My son stood in my kitchen with empty eyes and a cold voice, telling me he had drained every dollar from my pension accounts to pay off his wife's family gambling debts. Before I could even speak, my daughter-in-law Michelle stepped closer and said her family needed the money more than I ever would. In that moment, something inside me twisted, not from anger, but from the crushing realization that the people I had loved and supported had quietly turned me into nothing more than a resource to be exploited. I walked to the bank that afternoon, planning to close the account that no longer belonged to me. The manager looked at the screen, then at me, and pulled me aside with quiet urgency. "Sir, you need to see this," he whispered, and the printout he showed me made my blood turn cold. Nothing was what I thought it was. Their betrayal was deeper, their plan was bolder, and their secrets were far more dangerous than I ever imagined. What they had done behind my back wasn't just selfish, it was unforgivable, and it opened a door to a truth I never expected to find. They thought they had taken everything from me, but they had no idea what I still had left, and they certainly never imagined how far I was willing to go to make sure this time I was the one who ended everything. My name is Christopher Walsh. I'm 62 years old, a retired plant manager who spent 36 years in the Texas oil industry, working my way up from floor supervisor to running entire refineries across the Southwest. I built my career on steel and concrete, managing operations that kept the lights on from Houston to El Paso. I never imagined that the foundation of my own life could crumble so quickly, or that the people I trusted most would be the ones to break it. The morning it all began was hot, even for Dallas in late September. The kind of day where the air conditioning runs constantly and you think twice before stepping outside. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, a cup of black coffee cooling beside me, checking my pension account like I did every month. Just routine maintenance, paying bills, monitoring investments, keeping track of the $35,000 I'd saved over the years for emergencies and eventually to leave something behind for Matt, my only son. I typed in my password and waited for the screen to load. Through the window, I could see Patty's vegetable garden, the one she'd tended for 25 years before cancer took her 20 months ago. I still watered those tomato plants every morning, talking to her photograph on the kitchen counter about the weather, about what I was planning for dinner, about the cardinals that visited the bird feeder she'd hung from the old oak tree. It probably sounds foolish to anyone listening, but those quiet conversations keep her close. They remind me that love doesn't end just because someone is gone. That particular morning, I had been telling her about the strange phone calls I'd been getting, hang-ups when I answered, calls that rang once and stopped. Nothing alarming, just odd enough to mention. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted my routine. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the window, I saw Matt's silver Honda, and my heart lifted for a moment. He didn't visit often, maybe once a month since Patty's funeral. He lived 30 minutes south with his wife Michelle and their daughter Katie. I understood that life was busy, that young families had their own demands. Still, I missed him. I missed the boy who used to help me work on cars in the garage, handing me tools and asking endless questions about how engines worked. I opened the front door before they reached the porch. Matt looked different. His shoulders were tense, his eyes darting everywhere except toward mine. He mumbled a greeting and stepped inside quickly, as if being watched. Behind him came Michelle, and the air in the room seemed to change the moment she crossed the threshold. She walked in like she owned the place, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor Patty had refinished herself 15 years ago. She didn't smile, didn't ask how I was doing. She simply glanced around the living room with an expression I can only describe as appraising, like a buyer inspecting property she was planning to purchase. "We need to talk," Michelle announced, settling herself onto Patty's favorite armchair without being invited. Matt remained standing, fidgeting with his keys, his face pale in the morning light streaming through the windows. "What's going on?" I asked, looking between them. "Is everything all right? Is Katie okay?" "Katie's fine," Matt said quickly, his voice strained. "It's just, we're in a situation, Dad, a financial situation." Michelle cut in before he could continue, her voice smooth but carrying something cold underneath. "We're facing a crisis. Matt's business has had setbacks and we need help. Family helps family, right?" The words hung in the air between us, weighted with expectation. I felt uneasy, though I couldn't yet name why. Something in her tone suggested my agreement was already assumed, my cooperation a foregone conclusion rather than a request. "What kind of help are we talking about?" I asked, though something in Michelle's expression already told me I wouldn't like the answer. "We'll discuss the details," Michelle said dismissively, waving her hand as if my question was premature. But first, maybe you should check your accounts. Make sure everything is in order on your end. Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. The way she said your end, as if there were multiple ends to consider, as if this conversation was already more complicated than a simple request for help. I walked back to the kitchen table where my laptop still sat open, the pension account page waiting for my monthly review. I clicked refresh on the bank page. The numbers loaded, and for a moment I thought there must be a glitch, some kind of technical error. The screen had to be wrong. I blinked hard and looked again, my coffee cup forgotten as cold dread washed over me. The balance read $312.47, $35,000. Everything I had saved over 36 years in the oil industry was gone. My hands shook as I scrolled through the transaction history, transfer after transfer, amounts ranging from a few hundred to several thousand, all made over the past 6 months. Account numbers I didn't recognize. Authorizations I never gave. Each line item was like a punch to the gut, watching my life's work disappear in electronic transfers to destinations I'd never heard of. "Matt," I said, my voice barely steady, still staring at the screen. "What is this? What happened to my money?" My son couldn't meet my eyes. He stood there fidgeting with his keys, his face pale as morning frost. "It was an emergency, Dad. We were going to pay it back. We just needed..." Needed what? I turned to face them both, the laptop screen still glowing behind me like evidence of a crime. "You took everything without asking, without telling me. This is theft, Matt. This is stealing from your own father." Michelle didn't flinch. She watched me with calculating eyes, no trace of guilt or remorse on her face. If anything, she seemed almost amused by my shock, like a chess player who'd just revealed a winning strategy. "You should start thinking about your future, Christopher," she said, her smile thin and cold as winter ice. "You're not getting any younger." The silence that followed hung in the air like smoke from a fire you can't put out. I stood there, laptop still open on the table, staring at the woman my son had married. In that moment, I understood something I had refused to see for years. This wasn't a family emergency. This wasn't desperation born of circumstances beyond their control. This was calculation, pure and cold, delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Let me explain something to you," Michelle continued, crossing her legs and leaning back in Patty's chair as if she had always belonged there. "You're 62 years old. You live alone in a house that's too big for one person. You don't travel. You don't have expensive hobbies. What exactly do you need $35,000 for? Meanwhile, Matt and I are raising a child. We have a mortgage. We have real responsibilities." I turned to my son, waiting for him to say something, anything, in my defense. Waiting for the boy I'd raised to remember the man who'd worked double shifts to pay for his college, who'd taught him how to change oil and throw a football and treat people with respect. Matt kept his eyes fixed on the floor, his jaw tight, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked like a man who had rehearsed his silence, who had already decided that saying nothing was safer than speaking up. "Matt," I said quietly, my voice carrying all the disappointment I felt. "Look at me." He didn't. Michelle filled the space his silence left behind, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining simple facts to a slow child. "We're not the villains here, Christopher. We're trying to survive just like everyone else. And honestly, have you thought about what happens when you can't take care of yourself anymore? This house needs maintenance. The Texas summers are brutal. You're not young enough to keep climbing on roofs and fixing air conditioning units." She paused, tilting her head as if considering a business proposition that would benefit everyone involved. "You should sell the house. Move into one of those assisted living places. They take care of everything for you. Meals, cleaning, medical support. It would be better for everyone. Better for everyone." The phrase echoed in my head, each word a small knife cutting away at everything Patty and I had built together. She wasn't suggesting this out of concern for my well-being. She was clearing the board, removing obstacles, positioning pieces for some larger game I was only beginning to understand. In her eyes, I wasn't a father, not a person who had built a life in this house, who had raised a son within these walls, who had held his dying wife's hand in the bedroom upstairs. I was an inconvenience, an old man standing between her and whatever she truly wanted. "This is my home," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Patty and I built this life together. I'm not leaving." Michelle's expression flickered just for a moment before settling back into that practiced calm. "Well," she said, rising from the chair with deliberate slowness, Think about it. We'll be in touch." She looked at Matt, her voice taking on an edge of command. "Let's go. We've said what we needed to say." Matt finally lifted his gaze, and for a brief second I thought I saw something in his eyes. Shame, maybe, or the ghost of an apology he couldn't bring himself to speak. But then he turned and followed his wife to the door without a word, leaving me standing in my own kitchen like a stranger in my own life. The screen door banged shut behind them, and I was alone in the house that suddenly felt colder than the September heat outside. I sank into a kitchen chair and pressed my palms against my temples, trying to steady the storm inside my head. The laptop screen still glowed with the evidence of my financial ruin, numbers that didn't make sense in any world where family meant what I thought it meant. And then, unbidden, a memory surfaced. It was from years ago, maybe 4 or 5 summers past, when Patty was still healthy and the world still made sense. Jennifer Collins, Patty's closest friend, had come over for coffee one afternoon. I'd walked in from the garage to find them huddled together at this very table, speaking in low voices that stopped the moment they noticed me. "Just girl talk," Patty had said with a smile that didn't quite convince me. Later that evening, when we were alone, I asked her what they had been discussing. She hesitated before answering, her hands busy with dishes that didn't need washing. "I worry about Michelle," she finally said. "Something about her doesn't feel right. The way she looks at things, at people, like she's always measuring what she can take." I had dismissed it then, told her she was being overprotective, that Matt was a grown man capable of making his own choices. Patty had nodded, but her eyes held a sadness I didn't understand at the time. Now sitting in the silence she had left behind, I understood. She had seen it. She had tried to warn me, and I had not listened. I couldn't sit with these thoughts any longer. I needed answers. Real answers, not the rehearsed excuses Matt and Michelle had offered. I grabbed my keys and drove to the bank, the same branch where Patty and I had opened our accounts 25 years ago. The roads were quiet, the afternoon heat making everything shimmer like a mirage. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Michelle stood at my living room window, phone pressed to her ear, speaking urgently to someone. She wasn't watching the road, she was watching me. The bank was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few customers at the teller windows and the soft hum of air conditioning fighting the Texas heat. I approached the main counter, ready to demand an explanation for the unauthorized transfers, ready to fight if necessary. But before I could speak, a man in a dark suit stepped out from a side office. He was perhaps 5 years younger than me, with graying hair and a serious expression that suggested he'd been expecting me. Something about his demeanor told me this wasn't going to be a routine customer service interaction. "Mr. Walsh," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "My name is Andrew Morrison. I'm the branch vice president." He placed a hand gently on my arm and lowered his voice further. "We need to talk privately." Andy led me through a narrow hallway to a small office at the back of the bank. The afternoon sun slanted through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across a modest room. A few framed certificates on the wall, a potted plant that looked like it needed water, and a window overlooking the parking lot where my pickup sat alone in the shimmering heat. He closed the door behind us and gestured for me to sit in one of the 2 leather chairs facing his desk. He didn't sit behind his desk like a typical bank officer conducting business. Instead, he pulled the other chair closer to mine and lowered himself into it, as if what he had to say required proximity, required trust. "Mr. Walsh, I'm going to show you something," he said, reaching for a manila folder on his desk. His movements were careful, deliberate. "And I need you to stay calm. Can you do that for me?" I nodded, though my heart was already beating faster. The afternoon light through the blinds made everything feel surreal, like a scene from a movie I didn't want to be in. He opened the folder and spread several printed pages across the desk between us. Transaction records, dozens of them, each one highlighted in yellow marker. I recognized my account number at the top of each page, but the destination accounts were foreign to me, numbers that meant nothing but represented everything I'd lost. The transfers dated back 6 months, sometimes 2 or 3 in a single week, amounts ranging from $300 to $5,000. All of them flowing away from the account I'd spent 36 years filling, drop by drop, paycheck by paycheck, toward accounts I had never authorized and never seen. "These are the unauthorized transfers," Andy said quietly, his finger tracing down the highlighted entries. $35,000 total, moved in small enough increments to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts. Whoever did this knew exactly how to stay under the radar. I stared at the numbers, trying to make sense of the pattern. Each transfer was carefully calculated, never large enough to raise immediate suspicion, but consistent enough to drain my account systematically. It was like watching someone bleed me dry one cut at a time. Michelle, I said, the name tasting bitter in my mouth. My daughter-in-law. She and Matt came to my house this morning, said they had a financial emergency, but they already had the money. They'd been taking it for months. Andy nodded slowly, his expression grim. The destination accounts are linked to a Michelle Clark Walsh. We traced them within 24 hours of me noticing the irregularities. He paused, then pulled another document from the folder. But that's not all, Mr. Walsh. This is what concerns me most. He placed a single sheet of paper in front of me. It was a loan application, typed on official letterhead bearing my name and social security number. At the bottom was a signature that looked almost like mine, but not quite. The loops were too round, the slant too uniform. Someone had practiced my signature, but not well enough to fool a trained eye. $25,000, I said, reading the amount with growing horror. I never applied for this. I never signed anything. I know, Andy said, his voice carrying the weight of experience with financial crimes. That signature is a forgery. The loan was approved 3 months ago using your home as collateral. The funds were dispersed to the same accounts receiving your pension transfers. He let that sink in before continuing, watching my face as the full impact hit me. Mr. Walsh, if you don't act quickly, you could lose more than your savings. You could lose your house. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the armrest of the chair to steady myself as the air conditioning hummed overhead, suddenly too loud in the small space. $35,000 was devastating but survivable. I could rebuild, could find a way to live on just my Social Security and pension payments. But losing the house where Patty and I had built our life together, where we'd raised Matt, where every room held memories of 34 years of marriage, that was unthinkable. That was everything. Why are you telling me this? I asked, looking at Andy with new suspicion. Why not just report it to the police? Why take the risk of warning me? Andy leaned back slightly, his expression shifting to something more guarded. I've already reported it to our compliance department. They're investigating quietly, gathering evidence before escalating to federal authorities. Wire fraud, identity theft, forgery. These are serious crimes, Mr. Walsh. This isn't family drama. This is criminal enterprise. I studied him more closely, trying to read the things he wasn't saying. Bank vice presidents didn't typically get personally involved in individual fraud cases. They had procedures, protocols, layers of bureaucracy between them and customers like me. You said you noticed the irregularities, I pressed. Most bank managers wouldn't catch something like this, not with transfers designed to stay under the radar. Why were you watching my account so closely? Andy held my gaze for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, carrying a weight I couldn't identify. Your wife. I knew her better than you might think. Trust me on this. What does that mean? The question came out sharper than I intended, but I needed answers. Nothing about this conversation felt routine or professional anymore. He shook his head slowly. I can't explain right now. Not yet. But I promise you, Mr. Walsh, I'm on your side. I have been for a long time, even if you didn't know it. The statement hung between us, strange and weighted with meaning I couldn't decipher. I wanted to press him, to demand a clearer answer, but something in his eyes told me he wouldn't give one. Not today. There were secrets here, connections I didn't understand, pieces of a puzzle that extended beyond my stolen money. What do I do now? I asked instead, feeling suddenly older than my 62 years. Andy reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small white business card. He pressed it into my hand like he was passing along something precious. You need legal protection. Someone who understands financial crimes and knows how to fight people like your daughter-in-law. He tapped the card with his finger. Nicholas Ramsey. He's the best attorney in the state for cases like this. I've seen him dismantle schemes far more sophisticated than what Michelle has done. I looked down at the card, simple black text on white stock. Nicholas Ramsey, attorney at law with a phone number and address in downtown Dallas. The paper felt substantial in my hands, like hope made tangible. Call him today, Andy continued, his voice urgent now. Don't wait. Don't try to handle this yourself, and whatever you do, don't confront Michelle directly. People like her, they're dangerous when cornered. They'll destroy evidence, lie to authorities, turn your own family against you if they can. I slipped the card into my shirt pocket, feeling its slight weight like a lifeline thrown across dark water. "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse with emotion. "I don't understand why you're helping me, but thank you." Andy stood and extended his hand. I shook it, and he held on a moment longer than necessary, his grip firm and reassuring. "Mr. Walsh," he said quietly, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made me pay attention. "Your wife would have wanted you to call him." The words stopped me cold. "You knew Patty?" But Andy was already opening the door, his expression closing like a book being shut. The professional mask slipped back into place, transforming him from ally back to banker. "Call Nicholas Ramsey," he said again. "Today, before Michelle makes her next move." I drove home from the bank in a daze, Andy's words echoing in my mind. Your wife would have wanted you to call him. How did he know Patty? What connection existed between a bank vice president and my late wife that I had never known about? The questions multiplied with every mile, tangling together until I could barely think straight. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the afternoon sun was already fading behind the houses and my home looked darker than usual, emptier somehow, as if it too understood that something fundamental had shifted. I didn't go inside immediately. Instead, I sat in the truck for a long moment, staring at Patty's tomato plants visible through the kitchen window, and I knew where I needed to go. I needed to talk to Patty, even if she couldn't answer. I needed to sit beside her and try to make sense of a world that had stopped making sense the moment Michelle smiled at me that morning. The cemetery was quiet when I arrived, the way it always was in late afternoon. Dead leaves scattered across the paths, and the September heat made the air thick and still. I walked the familiar route to Patty's grave, my boots crunching on the gravel walkway that led to the section where she rested beneath a simple granite stone. But as I approached, I realized I wasn't alone. A woman knelt beside the headstone, arranging a small bouquet of white roses in the metal vase we had placed there after the funeral. She wore a light blue dress and a sun hat that shaded her face, and when she heard my footsteps, she turned. Jennifer Collins, Patty's oldest friend. They had known each other since college, had been maid of honor at each other's weddings, had raised their children in parallel lives filled with shared holidays and long phone calls. After Patty died, Jen had been at the funeral, had brought casseroles during those first terrible weeks, had called to check on me regularly for the first few months. But gradually, as grief does, we had drifted into our separate silences. I hadn't seen her in almost 6 months. She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her knees, and looked at my face. Whatever she saw there made her expression change from surprise to concern. "Christopher," she said softly, "what's happened?" I opened my mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. Everything, the stolen money, the forged loan, Andy's cryptic warnings, Michelle's cold smile, pressed against my chest like a physical weight. The afternoon heat felt suddenly oppressive, and I found myself struggling to breathe. Jen stepped forward and took my arm, her grip firm and steady. "Come with me," she said. "My house is 10 minutes from here. I'll make coffee and you'll tell me everything." Her kitchen was cool and smelled of cinnamon, a stark contrast to the heat and chaos I had left behind. She set a steaming mug in front of me and sat across the table, waiting patiently while I gathered my thoughts. The familiar domestic routine, coffee brewing, chairs scraping against linoleum, the quiet tick of a wall clock, helped steady my nerves. And so I told her. I told her about Matt and Michelle's visit, about the missing savings, about the forged loan using my house as collateral. I told her about Andy Morrison and his strange familiarity with my family, about the business card in my pocket, and the warning that I needed legal protection before Michelle made her next move. When I finished, my coffee had gone cold and my voice was raw. Jen was quiet for a long moment, her hands wrapped around her own mug as if drawing warmth from it despite the heat outside. Then she reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "Christopher," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "there's something I need to tell you. Something Patty asked me to keep secret, unless the time came when you needed to know." I looked at her, not understanding, my heart beginning to race again. 3 years ago, before she got sick, Patty came to me. She was worried. Not about her health, not yet, but about Michelle. She said she'd been watching her for years, noticing things that didn't add up. The way Michelle looked at your house, at your savings, at everything you and Patty had built. The way she controlled Matt, isolated him from old friends, made decisions for him without asking. Jen paused, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Patty told me, "If anything happens to Christopher after I'm gone, help him. Michelle is not who she pretends to be." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. Patty had seen it. She had known long before any of this happened what Michelle truly was, and she had tried to prepare for a day she prayed would never come. "I've been watching," Jen continued quietly, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "From a distance, but I had no proof, nothing concrete until now." She squeezed my hand tighter. "Patty also told me she prepared for the worst. She said you should check the safe, the one in your bedroom closet. There's something she left for you." Jen stood and walked to a small writing desk in the corner of her kitchen. She opened a drawer and withdrew a faded envelope, yellowed at the edges, with handwriting I would recognize anywhere. Patty's handwriting. My name was written on the front in her careful script, and below it a single instruction that made my breath catch in my throat. "Only open when you feel truly betrayed." She gave this to me 3 months before she died, Jen said, placing the envelope in my hands with the reverence of someone handling something sacred. She made me promise to hold it until the right moment. I think that moment is now. I stared at the envelope, at Patty's handwriting, at the words she had written, knowing someday I might need them. My wife had been gone for 20 months, but in that moment, sitting in Jen's kitchen with her final message in my hands, I felt her presence more strongly than I had since the day she died. I called Nicholas Ramsey that evening, my hands still trembling slightly as I held the business card Andy had given me. The envelope from Patty sat unopened on my kitchen table. Jen had told me to read it, but something held me back. Perhaps the fear that once I opened it, I would have to accept fully that my wife had known all along what was coming, that she had prepared for a betrayal I had been too blind to see. The phone rang twice before a calm, measured voice answered. I explained who I was, mentioned Andy Morrison's name, and before I could say anything else, Nick interrupted me. "Mr. Walsh," he said, "I've been expecting your call. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? 9 o'clock? Bring everything you have." His office was downtown in a glass building overlooking the Trinity River. The waiting room was modest but professional, with framed diplomas on the walls and leather chairs arranged around a low table covered in legal magazines. A receptionist offered me coffee, which I accepted gratefully. My stomach was too knotted to eat breakfast, but I needed something to calm my nerves. Within minutes, Nick emerged from his office and shook my hand firmly. He was perhaps 57, with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He had the bearing of a man who had fought many battles and won most of them. He led me into a room lined with bookshelves and gestured for me to sit across from his desk. The morning sun slanted through tall windows, casting long shadows across polished wood surfaces that spoke of success and competence. I had brought the transaction records Andy had printed for me, the forged loan application, and the business card with Andy's handwritten note on the back. I spread them across Nick's desk and watched as he examined each document carefully, his expression growing more serious with every page. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands, studying me with the intensity of a prosecutor preparing for trial. "This is organized financial fraud," he said flatly. "Not careless overspending, not a family misunderstanding. Someone planned this methodically, executed it over months, and designed it specifically to avoid detection." He tapped the papers with his finger. The small transfer amounts, the timing, the forged signature on the loan. "This is the work of someone who has done this before." The words confirmed what I had feared but hadn't wanted to believe. This wasn't Michelle's first crime. I wasn't her first victim. "Michelle," I said, her name tasting like poison. "My daughter-in-law." "Almost certainly," Nick agreed, his voice carrying the weight of experience with cases like mine. "But Mr. Walsh, I need to tell you something that may surprise you. This isn't the first time I've heard your family's name." He paused, studying my reaction carefully. "Your wife, Patty, came to see me about 3 years ago. She was concerned about protecting your family's assets, the house, your savings, your pension. She didn't give me specific reasons at the time, just said she wanted to make sure everything was secure in case something happened to her. I stared at him, my mouth dry. Patty never mentioned meeting with an attorney. In 34 years of marriage, she had never kept secrets from me, or so I had thought. She asked me to keep it confidential, Nick continued. I helped her establish a revocable living trust that placed your primary assets under protection. The house specifically is titled in a way that makes it very difficult for anyone to leverage it without your explicit notarized consent. He tapped the forged loan application sitting between us. Whoever forged this signature didn't know about the trust. The loan itself may not be enforceable, which means your house is safer than Michelle realizes. A small wave of relief washed over me, though it was quickly swallowed by the larger tide of anger and confusion. Patty had protected me even from beyond the grave. But why hadn't she told me? Why had she carried this burden alone, meeting with lawyers and setting up trusts without saying a word? What do I do now? I asked, feeling like a man who had just discovered he was living in a world with different rules than he thought. Nick leaned forward, his expression becoming sharper, more focused. First, you do nothing. Don't confront Michelle. Don't tell Matt what you know. Don't give any indication that you're aware of the fraud. People like your daughter-in-law are predators. They overreach when they think they're winning. She believes you're a confused old man who doesn't understand what happened to his money. Let her keep believing that. He picked up the transaction records again, studying the pattern of thefts with professional interest. Tell me about Michelle's family. Does she have anyone she's close to? Siblings, parents, anyone who might be involved? I thought for a moment, my mind racing through family gatherings and holiday visits. She has a brother, Tim. I've only met him a few times at Christmas and Thanksgiving. He always seemed, I searched for the right word, shady. He talked a lot about business ventures that never seemed to go anywhere. Michelle was always whispering with him in corners, away from everyone else. Nick made a note on his legal pad, his pen moving quickly across the page. Timothy Clark, yes. He turned his notepad toward me, showing a list of the account numbers where my money had been transferred. 2 of these accounts are registered to a Timothy Clark. The transactions aren't just flowing to Michelle, they're flowing through a network. He looked up at me, his eyes hard. This has the fingerprints of a practiced scheme, Mr. Walsh. Your daughter-in-law didn't invent this overnight. She's been doing it for a long time, possibly to other victims we don't know about yet. The realization settled over me like a cold fog. Michelle hadn't just stolen from me. She was part of something larger, something organized, and my son was either complicit or trapped in the middle of it without understanding what he had married into. What happens next? I asked. Nick set down his pen and looked at me with an expression that was almost predatory in its focus. Now, he said, we watch, we document, and we wait for her to make another mistake. Nick was right. Michelle made her next mistake within 48 hours, though I didn't realize it immediately. It started with something small, an uneasy feeling I couldn't quite name. Every time I left the house that week, I had the sensation of being watched. When I drove to the grocery store, a car that looked like Matt's Honda appeared in my rearview mirror, then turned off before I could be certain. When I walked to the mailbox, I noticed a vehicle parked at the end of my street that I didn't recognize. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of everything was making me see threats where none existed. But Nick had taught me to trust my instincts, to pay attention to patterns that didn't feel right. So on a humid Thursday morning, when the Texas heat was already making the air shimmer like water, I decided to check. I walked around my pickup truck slowly, methodically, looking for anything that shouldn't be there. I found it under the rear bumper, attached with a magnetic case no bigger than a deck of cards, a GPS tracker. Someone had been monitoring my every movement, and I knew exactly who that someone was. I photographed the device without touching it, then called Nick immediately. He instructed me to leave it in place for now, to let Michelle believe her surveillance was undetected. Let her think she's in control, he said, his voice crackling through my phone as I stood in my garage, looking at my truck with new eyes. The more confident she feels, the more careless she'll become. The next day, I drove to the bank to speak with Andy about the ongoing investigation. I had barely stepped through the front doors when I heard her voice behind me, sharp and demanding, cutting through the quiet hum of the air-conditioned lobby. Michelle strode into the bank like she owned the building, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her expression fixed in that cold mask I had come to recognize as her true face. She walked straight past me without acknowledgement and approached the main counter, demanding to speak with the branch manager about family accounts. Andy emerged from his office, his face calm and professional, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Walsh," he said, his voice carrying just enough for me to hear from across the lobby. "Account information is only available to the account holder or individuals with documented authorization. I don't have any such authorization on file for you." Michelle's composure cracked just for a moment, revealing the fury beneath her polished exterior. "This is ridiculous. My father-in-law is elderly. He needs family support to manage his finances. I'm trying to help him." "Then I suggest you ask Mr. Walsh to add you as an authorized user," Andy replied smoothly, his tone remaining perfectly professional despite the storm brewing in front of him. "Until then, I can't assist you." She turned and saw me standing near the entrance watching the entire exchange. Our eyes met, and something flickered across her face. Surprise, then calculation, then that familiar cold smile that never reached her eyes. "Christopher," she said sweetly, walking toward me with that practiced smile that had fooled me for years. "I didn't know you'd be here. I was just trying to sort out some confusion about the accounts. You know how complicated banking can be at your age." I said nothing. I simply watched her, letting the silence stretch between us until it became uncomfortable. Every instinct Nick had taught me told me to stay quiet, to let her reveal herself through her own words and actions. She finally looked away, her mask slipping just enough for me to see the calculation behind her eyes. She left without another word, but I saw her glance back through the glass doors, her phone already pressed to her ear as she walked quickly toward her car. That afternoon, Matt called. His voice sounded different over the phone, tired, uncertain, nothing like the confident son I remembered from years past. "Dad, I need to see you," he said, his words coming out in a rush. "Not at a restaurant or anywhere public. Can I come to the house? There's something I need to tell you." There was something in his tone I hadn't heard before. Not just the weariness I had grown accustomed to, but genuine fear. I told him to come immediately, and he arrived within the hour, parking his car behind the garage where it couldn't be seen from the road. When he walked through the back door, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. His eyes were red-rimmed, his clothes wrinkled, and he kept glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to appear behind him. He was carrying a laptop under his arm, and his hands shook as he set it on the kitchen table. "I found something," he said, not meeting my eyes. "On the computer Sabrina and I share. She forgot to log out of her email and He trailed off, swallowing hard. "I know I shouldn't have looked, but after what you told me about the bank, about the money, I couldn't stop thinking. I needed to know the truth." He opened the laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was an email dated 4 years ago, sent from Michelle's personal account to an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was empty, but the message itself was short, brutal, and unmistakable. "Mom," it read, "I've made my decision. If I marry Matt, his father's house is the key. The property alone is worth $280,000, and the old man won't last forever. Once he's gone, everything passes to Matt, which means it passes to me. This is our way out. Trust me." I read the words twice, 3 times, waiting for them to mean something different, but they didn't change. My daughter-in-law had written to her mother years before Patty died, laying out a plan to marry my son not for love, not for partnership, but for inheritance. Matt was never her husband. He was her investment, and I was simply an obstacle with an expiration date. "I'm sorry, Dad." Matt's voice cracked like a teenager's. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not the weak man I had blamed for months, but someone far more tragic. A victim who had been manipulated so thoroughly he didn't even recognize the cage around him. Michelle had chosen him carefully, had groomed him slowly, had isolated him from everyone who might have helped him see the truth. By the time their marriage solidified, Matt had no friends left, no independence, no way out. "When did you find this?" I asked quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. 2 nights ago," he said. I confronted her about it. He laughed bitterly, a sound without humor. "That was a mistake." "What happened?" Matt's face went pale as he remembered. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try to explain or make excuses. She just looked at me with this this coldness, like I was something she had scraped off her shoe. His voice dropped to a whisper, and then she said, "If you say anything to your father, I'll destroy you. I have messages, photos, things you don't want anyone to see. Try me, Matt. See what happens." The words hung in the air between us, ugly and threatening. I understood then the full scope of what Michelle had done. She hadn't just stolen money or forged signatures. She had built a prison around my son, brick by brick, using shame and secrets as her mortar. Matt was terrified of her, not because she might leave him, but because she had weaponized his own life against him. "Matt," I said carefully, "did your mother ever say anything to you about Michelle before she passed?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the laptop screen as if it held answers he was afraid to find. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow with regret. "Once, about a year before she got sick. Mom took me aside after Thanksgiving dinner and asked if I was happy. Really happy. I told her of course I was." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. She looked at me with this expression like she wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. Finally, she said, "If you ever need help, come to me, no matter what. Promise me." I promised, but I didn't understand what she meant. His voice broke completely. "I think I understand now." Patty had tried, even with Matt, she had tried to plant a seed of awareness, to leave a door open in case he ever needed to escape. But he hadn't been ready to hear it then. He had been too deep in Michelle's web, too convinced that his marriage was normal, too afraid of what admitting the truth would mean. "Your mother saw what Michelle was," I said gently, reaching across the table to place my hand on his shoulder. "She tried to protect both of us. She left me documents, warnings, people I could trust. She knew this day might come." Matt looked up at me, and for the first time since he'd arrived, I saw something other than fear in his eyes. I saw the faint flicker of hope, fragile and desperate, like a candle struggling against a strong wind. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking on the word. "She controls everything. My bank accounts, my credit cards, my phone. I can't buy a cup of coffee without asking permission." The words tumbled out now, as if a dam had finally burst. "I have to account for every minute of my day. If I'm 5 minutes late coming home from work, she wants to know where I was, who I talked to, why I didn't call." He pulled out his wallet and showed me the contents: a driver's license, a single credit card, and $23 in cash. "This is everything I have," he said. "She gives me $50 a week for expenses. She says all wives manage household finances, that this is normal." I stared at the nearly empty wallet, at my 33-year-old son reduced to asking his wife for lunch money like a child asking for an allowance. The anger I had carried toward him for months, the frustration at his silence, his complicity, his failure to stand up for me, dissolved in that moment like morning frost in sunlight. My son wasn't weak. He wasn't a co-conspirator. He was a man who had been systematically broken by someone who understood exactly how to exploit his trust, his love, his desperate need to believe that his wife was who she pretended to be. "This is not your fault," I said firmly, the words carrying all the conviction I possessed. "None of this is your fault." Matt broke then. The tears he had been fighting finally won, spilling down his cheeks as his shoulders shook with silent sobs. I moved to the chair beside him and held my son the way I had when he was a child, when nightmares woke him in the darkness and the only cure was his father's arms around him. We stayed like that for a long time, two men broken by the same woman, finally finding their way back to each other. Later that afternoon, I brought Matt to meet Nick. My son was terrified, convinced that any action against Michelle would result in the destruction she had promised. But Nick listened to his story with the careful attention of a man who had seen this pattern before, who understood the psychology of predators and their victims. When Matt finished speaking, the attorney leaned forward with something close to hope in his eyes. "Your testimony changes everything," Nick said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "You're not just a witness to what Michelle did to your father. You're a victim yourself. Financial abuse, emotional manipulation, identity theft through those credit cards opened in your name. These are crimes, Matt. Federal crimes." He paused, studying my son's frightened face. "Your willingness to testify proves you have nothing to gain and everything to lose by telling the truth." That makes you credible in ways that hired experts and paper trails never could be." Matt looked uncertain, his hands trembling as he gripped the arms of his chair. "She'll destroy me if I do this. She has things, leverage, ways to hurt me that you can't imagine." Nick's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. "She already has destroyed you, Matt. The question is whether you want to spend the rest of your life under her control or whether you're ready to take it back." The silence stretched long enough for me to hear the air conditioning humming in the walls, the distant sound of traffic on the street below. Then Matt turned to me, and in his eyes I saw the boy I'd raised, the son I had loved, fighting his way back to the surface after years of drowning. He gripped my hand tightly, his fingers cold but his grip fierce. "Tell me what to do, Dad," he said. "I'll do anything to make this right." That evening, after Matt had gone back to his apartment, he was afraid to go home to Michelle, I finally opened the envelope Jen had given me. I sat at my kitchen table with Patty's photograph beside me, her smile unchanged after all these months, and unfolded the letter my wife had written knowing this day might come. "My dearest Chris," it began in the handwriting I would recognize anywhere. "If you're reading this, then what I feared has finally happened, and I'm so sorry I'm not there to face it with you. I had to stop reading, my vision blurred by tears I hadn't known I was holding. Patty's voice seemed to fill the kitchen, speaking to me across the divide between life and death, offering comfort and strength when I needed it most. I've spent the last 2 years watching, worrying, and preparing for a day I hoped would never come. But I know you, my love. I know your kindness, your faith in people, your endless capacity to forgive. These are the things I fell in love with 34 years ago. They are also the things that make you vulnerable to someone who sees generosity as weakness." The letter went on to detail everything: her observations of Michelle's behavior, her secret meetings with Nick and Andy, her careful planning to protect our assets and our family. She had seen the predator beneath Michelle's surface, had tried to warn us all, had built a safety net she prayed we would never need. But most importantly, she had left me the tools to fight back. Not just legal documents and trusted allies, but the knowledge that love truly does transcend death, that even from wherever she was watching over me, Patty was still taking care of the man she had promised to love forever. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside her photograph. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. But tonight, I wasn't alone. The days that followed were a blur of legal preparations, evidence gathering, and careful strategy. Nick worked with a federal prosecutor to build an airtight case, while Andy continued monitoring Michelle's increasingly desperate attempts to access my accounts. Matt stayed at my house, slowly learning to live without fear, to make decisions without asking permission, to remember who he had been before Michelle stripped away his identity piece by piece. The trap closed completely when Timothy Clark tried to board a flight to Mexico City at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. He was carrying a single suitcase and a one-way ticket purchased with cash just hours before. Federal agents were waiting at the security checkpoint. Tim's arrest triggered a chain reaction that brought down everything Michelle had built. Faced with serious federal charges and the prospect of 15 years in prison, Tim immediately began talking. He confirmed that Michelle had masterminded their father's financial destruction, that she had targeted me specifically because of Matt, and that the plan had always been to drain my accounts and disappear before anyone could stop them. The final confrontation came in a federal courtroom in downtown Dallas, a wood-paneled room that smelled of old books and floor wax. I sat in the gallery with Matt beside me, watching as Michelle was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. The transformation was complete. The cold, calculating woman who had terrorized my family was now just another defendant, diminished and powerless. Nick presented our evidence methodically, building the case piece by piece: the transaction records, the forged loan documents, the GPS tracker, Tim's confession, Matt's testimony about years of financial and emotional abuse. It all painted a picture of systematic fraud that left no room for doubt. When it was Matt's turn to testify against his own wife, I watched my son walk to the witness stand like a man approaching redemption. His voice was steady as he told the court everything: the control, the manipulation, the threats that had kept him silent for years. "She gave me $50 a week like I was a child," he said, his words carrying across the courtroom. She opened credit cards in my name without telling me. She tracked my location, read my emails, controlled every aspect of my life. When I found evidence of what she was doing to my father, she threatened to destroy me if I spoke up. Michelle watched him with burning hatred, but Matt never looked away. He held her gaze and kept speaking, kept telling the truth, kept choosing his father over his fear. The prosecution's final witness was Rebecca Clark, Michelle's own mother, who had flown in from Louisiana. Her testimony was devastating in its quiet honesty. "My daughter destroyed her father," she said simply. "She drained his accounts while he was dying, left him with nothing but shame." When I confronted her about it, she told me he was going to die anyway. Why should his money rot in a bank when she could use it? Rebecca's voice broke slightly. That was the last time I spoke to my daughter, until I read about Mr. Walsh's case in the news and knew I had to help. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, conspiracy, elder abuse. The judge sentenced Michelle to 8 years in federal prison with full restitution. Tim received 3 years for his cooperation. When the final judgment was read, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, but peace. The battle was over. Justice had been served, and the family Michelle had tried to destroy was finally free to heal. 6 months later, I sat on my back porch on a warm spring evening, watching Katie help me water Patty's vegetable garden. My granddaughter had moved in with Matt when he bought a house just 10 minutes away, close enough to visit every day, far enough for him to rebuild his independence. "Grandpa," Katie said, looking up from the tomato plants with dirt on her hands and joy in her eyes, "tell me about Grandma Patty again. The story about how she planted these." I smiled, settling back in my chair as the evening light painted the Texas sky in shades of gold and orange. "Your grandmother planted this garden 25 years ago," I began, just as I had dozens of times before. She said it was her way of building something beautiful that would last. Matt appeared at the back door, home from his new job at an engineering firm. He looked different now, stronger, more confident, more like the son I remembered from before Michelle entered our lives. He had filed for divorce immediately after the trial, and custody of Katie had been awarded to him without question. "Evening, Dad," he said, settling into the chair beside mine. "How was your day?" "Good," I said, and meant it. Andy called. The last of the restitution came through. Michelle's assets are being liquidated to pay back everyone she stole from. Matt nodded, then was quiet for a moment. "You know what Mom would say if she could see us now?" I looked at Patty's photograph, visible through the kitchen window, her smile unchanged by time or sorrow. She'd say we did exactly what she hoped we would do. We fought back, we protected each other, and we didn't let Michelle win. That night, after Matt and Katie had gone home, I stood alone in my kitchen and spoke to Patty's picture one last time before bed. "I kept my promise," I said quietly. "I fought for our family. I protected what we built together, and I made sure justice was served. But most of all, I learned something Michelle never understood. Love doesn't end with death. You're still taking care of us, even now." I touched the glass gently, tracing the outline of her face with my finger. "Thank you for never stopping, even when I couldn't see what you were doing. Thank you for building a safety net strong enough to catch us all." The house was quiet around me, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like home again. A place where family gathered, where laughter echoed through the rooms, where love had built something strong enough to withstand any storm. If this story has touched your heart, remember this. Kindness is not weakness, but kindness without boundaries is an invitation to be used. Protect yourself, trust the people who prove themselves worthy, and never stop believing that justice, though sometimes slow, will find its way to those who need it most. The people who truly love you will fight for you even from beyond the grave. Hold on to that love and let it give you the strength to fight back when the time comes.